Maine.
Hold on one second. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in more turmoil than ever. It's like we keep adding layers of turbulence. There's climate change, there's climate vulnerability, there's the war in Ukraine, started by Putin, and now there's a war unfolding in the Middle East that has a terrible origin and uncertain outcome. There's the information wars, to use Alex Jones's term. You know, we're in an arena where the online miracle of connectedness can be undone and used to bad outcome as well as good. We're going to try for the good side here today, as Andy Revkin, 40th year in journalism, recently left Columbia University and now I'm independent here in Wabanaki Territory and on the coast of Maine. I just got back clearing my head kayaking, and it's a wonderful gift to be able to do that. We're going to talk today about issues that arise when the capacities of the human body and the human mind are impeded, not through anyone's fault, but through fate, through whether it's genetic or environmental or an accident or the like. My only glimpse into this arena as a human came when I had a stroke in 2011. And it was like opening a door into a world of disability. But I was lucky for many reasons. Just Google for my name, Revkin, and stroke, and you can read a story and find a story collider thing I did about it. And that made me really deeply understand and respect a lot of what's in the book that Skylar and Gabby have edited and contributed to, called Uncharted, which is about disability and ability in science and how it's there are impediments to pursuing careers in science and getting forward in those careers because of disabilities and because these arenas are not well set up yet still for a smooth landscape. You could say that's true of every enterprise, but but science, there's several arenas where it's even truer. So I'm just really pleased to have Gabi and Skylar Bayer here today, Gabi Serrato Marks. And let's just start by, I just would love each of you to sort of introduce yourself, not so much, your title, but, initially what brought you to science and then what brought you to this question within science. Maybe we'll start with Gabby.
Sure. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Andy. I have been drawn to science pretty much my whole life. I went to undergrad at Bowdoin College in Maine, so I am familiar with the head clearing kayak ride, and I really, really enjoyed being outside and sort of found a way to integrate science, especially interdisciplinary science, into that by doing a lot of different types of environmental science. So I was not disabled that I was aware of until I started graduate school. And so once I started grad school, sort of similar to what you were saying, I didn't really have an idea of how hard things could be or also how great things could be, but how challenging, what challenges there are for anybody with a disability. And then once I realized that I had a disability. I have a connective tissue disorder, which is actually genetic. So I've always had it, but I just wasn't aware. I sort of couldn't look away or I couldn't just ignore it once I saw how frustrating things could be. So I think Skylar and I met mostly on the internet and sort of got connected from there.
Yeah. Despite the main.
We just missed each other in Maine, yeah, and in grad school too. So it's been a funny kind of way to meet. But.
Okay, and Skylar, marine biology, and then, so how did that come about? And then when did you realize you have challenges? One of which is described in the book pretty vividly.
Yeah. So I've pretty much always wanted to be a marine biologist. I'm actually one of those millennials that pursued it to the end. And people laugh because everyone's like, oh, everyone wanted to be a marine biologist when they were a kid. And I was one of the few that kept pursuing that goal, even though I grew up in suburbia. But yeah, I think in terms of my challenges, I had corrective heart surgery when I was born. It's called transposition of the great arteries. So actually, my arteries were switched and they were in the wrong place. And so if I hadn't had surgery, I would have died probably in a couple weeks from lack of oxygen, because the circuit to the lung wasn't really connected to the circuit to the rest of my body. So I'd always been aware that I had, I was different medically, but I was sort of under the false impression that everything was pretty much fine. I went through this surgery and that was sort of all I needed. But when I was about 25, I started my PhD program at University of Maine at the Darling Marine Center, which is near Damerscott in Midcoast, Maine. And that was like in 2011. And I was there to pursue more of a scuba diving track, which was really exciting. I'd done a bunch of training at Woods Hole where I'd done my master's, but then I was really excited to spend most of my time diving for my PhD, at least I thought. But then I started developing these heart arrhythmias and I was really sick and I got hospitalized. And they discovered that I had what's called polymorphic arrhythmia, which just means many-formed arrhythmia, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but they didn't know what to fix it, right? So I had electrical problems now as well as the previous plumbing issues I'd had. So they put in what's called an implantable cardioverter device, which can defibrillate as well as pace. And so I've had that in my chest for 12 years. It's wired to my heart. I consider myself having a medical condition more than a disability, but recently, in the last month, I started beeping. I beep at 12:03 and 6:03, so 4 times a day, because my battery is running low. And now I'm actually going back to Boston next month anyway, but now I have to have a catheterization surgery to find out if they're going to replace the unit or if they're going to just take it out or whatever. And my last surgical experience was not great. I have some trauma from it. But so anyway, it's not just this thing that got fixed and it's gone now. It's like forever with me and something I always have to consider with my career. And I couldn't scuba dive anymore. I forgot to mention that. I couldn't scuba dive anymore after I got diagnosed. However, I was really into storytelling and was working with Story Collider, and I told a story that's in the book called My Brown Waterproof Boots, which are extra toughs for anyone who lives in like Maine or Alaska. They're like Alaska's flagship shoes. It was devastating that I couldn't scuba dive because everyone else could in my lab, and I learned to drive the boat and everything, but I never felt good enough. That's what the story is about. But told this story to Story Collider producers, and one of my good friends, Aaron Barker, who's the executive producer, was like, "Wow, this is a great story. Gabi told her story about disability in science. I feel like you two should like get together and do something." And so I emailed her and we're like, "Oh, maybe we should like write a book or something." And that's how we got started on this project.
And the book is kaleidoscopic. It's got I can't think of how many chapters or essays, but there are many. And what's really rich about it is, of course, it's got every dimension. Some of them are subtle. ADHD is in there, something that I've had to grapple with, and how I write and stay focused and don't get sucked into social media too far. But it's also got blindness. And how did you guys reach out and find all the contributors?
A lot of people we found through social media, actually, speaking of getting sucked into social media. But we put out a call for contributors and reached out to some people directly who we were familiar with or who we knew might have a story to tell, but hadn't quite gotten the chance yet. So a lot of social media. Anything else, Skylar? Any other ways we grabbed people?
Well, that was, I think, through our initial sort of calls for pitches, which started in 2018. So this has been like a 5-year project. And I think we did a second call in 2019, but we did start doing some specific searching. So, for example, we didn't hear from any blind contributors when we first set out. So I attended a conference online. I think it was called Island, but I don't remember what the acronym stands for. Where I got to hear some really great blind speakers at this event. And so I reached out to them because I'd never heard of them or interacted with them on social media. And then we did some other targeted searching through our networks or social media. So,
was there any contact that was made or any contributor who was really out of the blue, someone or a theme you hadn't thought of when you thought of disability?
We could talk about the seasickness. There's one chapter on seasickness that
was
a lot of people point to that, and say like, well, this isn't really a disability, and we fully agree. The contributor agrees, and is also a way to show that everybody can really have experience with health issues and how debilitating they can be, or scary, or frustrating, and it doesn't always have to be something that's really serious or something that drastically changes your life, that it can just be part of your story.
Right.
Brings a little humor to everything else. I don't think we thought we would include that initially. I don't think that was on our list to make sure we included.
Yeah, and we went pretty broad. Like, we have folks who've had cancer, whether or not you can consider cancer a disability once you've recovered. I don't know. I think that depends on your perspective, but I think we went kind of broad because, sometimes conditions are a problem for a little bit and then they go away. Sometimes they come back, but I think more people can relate to that. And then it's just kind of a step to then be like, well, then what if you had this condition all the time? Then that's a disability, usually, depending what you consider it yourself. But so I think that those kind of stories are easier hooks for people who have a hard time, I think, empathizing or understanding disability, to take maybe another step further, reading another story that is someone who it considers himself disabled. So,
yeah, and this whole idea of the issue of chronic illness too is sort of distinct from what we think of as disabilities. There is this is not a new theme. I was looking there. The National Institutes of Health has this advancing disability inclusion in the scientific workforce. And I think it's worth, what have you learned through the essays that were contributed to how this plays out? It's one thing, it's pretty clear if you can't scuba dive, that's a concrete kind of limitation in the field work you can do as a person, Skylar. But what institutionally has been holding people back when they're trying to kind of make a career? Either
I can chime in, although I'm sure Gabby has some more input here. But a lot of the time, I think a lot about Alma Schrag's essay, or Schrag, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she goes back and forth between field experiences and conferences, and she is deaf. And her field experiences actually go a lot better because people are willing to find ways to communicate with her to get the work done. She even downloads an app where she can see, I think, the sonograms of bird songs, and then she learns to visually interpret them because she can't hear them. But they make it work, and it's amazing. But then she goes to these conferences, and she can't get an interpreter, or there's not captions. She's struggling to lip read, but there's just like not a lot of institutional momentum or willpower to help her. And she does comment that at one of these conferences, all the people that do help her, I think, are minoritized themselves, or they're underrepresented groups who are marginalized and who have their own issues, I think, fitting into the institution, which she notes is interesting. So I think there's a lot of lack of willpower from institutions to accommodate people who have different needs than what they consider to be normal people.
And is this something that's adequately integrated now? And there are all whole offices that didn't exist a few years ago: diversity, inclusion, equity. Many of the focal points are related to race and past societal injustice. Is this integrated in that arena much? I don't know if you've been probing Gabby or how that comes across.
Yeah, I think it's really important to start off by understanding that disability is an intersection. So there are going to be Black women who are marginalized in specific ways who are also disabled, which adds another layer of that marginalization. So I think it has to be integrated, and approximately 20% of the population is disabled. So it's a really severe underrepresentation when we only have like 2 or 3% of science PhDs having disabilities. So I think it is being included in a lot of places. The challenge that I see is that institutions have really high bars for what allows students or staff often to get connected with like the Office for Disabilities, and that often includes pretty stringent diagnosis criteria. So if you don't know what's wrong, or you don't have a word for it, or you haven't been able to see a doctor because you're a PhD student who's working probably too many hours a week, it can get hard to connect to those offices, which is a little bit unlike other types of support that exist, I think, in university and institutional spaces.
Yeah, and I'll just say too that a saying that I've heard a lot is ADA is the floor, not the ceiling. But there are a lot of offices for disability at universities that I think is more for the university than the students in some cases. And so
that's interesting.
There's a number of stories in this book even of people trying really hard to get like their disabilities, confirmed on paper, and find these offices really challenging to work with. And they're mostly grad students who talk about it, but it's those offices aren't necessarily always designed to help them more so than the university, which is unfortunate. And sometimes it doesn't matter, because if you're a grad student and your advisor who, that's the person that really matters the most in terms of getting you through, unfortunately, if they aren't empathetic or supportive of your situation, it's really, really difficult to get what you need to thrive in your program.
Or your department chair, or anyone who has that kind of power above you. Yeah.
Yeah, and they, frankly, I was in academia at Pace University for 6 years and then at Columbia for 4. Never in a faculty track, meaning of tenure track, but I've seen and heard of instances where, just the logistical difficulties of helping someone navigate a young, early career person navigate, it just adds to your workload if you're the tenured whatever. There must be just lots of little sources of friction like that. Or in terms of hiring, getting a new position. Did that come up? I didn't read every essay in the book, but I don't know if people talk about.
There's a lot. There's 30, more than 30.
Yeah. Did people talk about that career, that aspect of career and advancement, where you have people do lip service to diversity and ADA kind of inclusion, but maybe it doesn't still always work?
I think there's a little bit about it. I'm trying to think of anyone's story in particular. I don't know that there's anything in particular about people trying to get hired.
I think it came up in that we had to work pretty hard to find faculty or more senior researchers who had disabilities and who were either willing or able to talk about it. I just gotta head out for a second.
Yeah.
We just close the door. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I remembered Juniper Simonis, who's one of our contributors, they actually started their own business for a while because they could meet their own needs that way, and they didn't have to, deal with tenure track issues or anything. They recently started working for the state, actually, though, which is nice because now they have some reliable benefits that are really needed, like health insurance. But they made a choice because they wanted to be able to get what they needed beyond just like their career success.
That's so interesting. Here, the book is illustrated with drawings of portraits of the folks who are contributors. By the way, how did that come about? That was kind of an interesting little twist.
I guess I'll tell that story.
Yeah.
So one of the things about publishing is when you sign a contract, you get a promise for an advance upon delivery of the book. But we really felt strongly about paying contributors up front. That was really important to us, but we had to figure out how to get money. So we applied to the Sloan Book Foundation. Sloan does a bunch of different kinds of grants, but they will give you grants for books. And so we wrote a grant just to pay our contributors. We were like, this is all we want the money for. We don't really want it for anything else. When they approved the grant, which was great, and then they gave us an extra $5,000 to hire an illustrator, which I've never had that happen before. And so we went on the hunt on, I guess, Instagram and Twitter, or the site formerly known as Twitter, to find Tiffany Chen, who this was the biggest project she ever had done. So it was a nice jumpstart in some ways for her illustration career. And that's how that happened. So thanks.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that is a rare.
Yeah.
That is a rare thing. That reminds me of the one time in my life ever an editor told me to write more.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen either. So Sloan, it sounds like what I'm trying to think of here a little bit is about the process of this book coming together, not just the book, but the community you built. Mm-hmm. Social media, you said, was important. I would guess that a lot of that was the thing that we used to call Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Twitter, Instagram. Right?
Instagram too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Instagram has more like visuals. No, it's okay. The more visuals. So with the artwork and stuff, that was where we went looking for Illustrator, at least.
Oh, that's interesting. But just building that community was, you think, mostly Twitter?
Yeah.
Or just people's connections.
It's not in person. We can definitely say that.
Yeah. And this was mostly during. Was this all during COVID, or did it start before? I can't remember.
It started before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got started in 2018. At the end of 2018, and I literally bought a book, How to Write a Book Proposal, and
that's where we started.
Yeah. And then we had a bunch of pitches. I think we did 2 rounds of pitches in 2019. We actually wrote an article for Scientific American. And that was also, after that article was when Gabby was approached by an editor at Columbia University Press. And 2020, we wrote our proposal. It was reviewed and we worked really hard. We had some connections, but we wanted to round out the book. And I'd say 2021 and 2022, we spent most of our time working with our contributors very intensely. A lot of stories just started as a pitch. And so we worked with all sorts of writers, people who've written before, but also people who'd never written anything like this at all. And we built, I would say, a lot of community that way. I also want to give a shout out, though, to Disabled in STEM account on Twitter, or the site formerly known as Twitter, who, they didn't make it into this book, but they're definitely a connection point for a lot of this community online.
That's interesting. It's you say is there a website and the like, or is it mostly Twitter, or is it
I think it's mostly Twitter, but
they may also have a website at this point. Yeah
you're reminding me Skype a Scientist, which built its whole, that
Yeah.
emerged on Twitter very much.
Yeah, it's disabledandstem.wordpress.com is their
Oh, good.
website. And they actually have a mentoring program that they started recently, which I just learned about from someone else. So there's, and they're not the only account. There's a bunch of them, like Disabled in Higher Ed, and there's quite a few. But a lot of the community is based online. It's been really important because that's how people find each other. That's how I found a lot of people in science communication years ago.
Yeah. Believe me, and I don't know about you. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and
Yep.
and the others. Mastodon. I still don't see there, and it's not just a function of mass of people yet. I just don't see the organic connectedness there. It seems mostly people who already know each other. It's very hard to dig in and find people. Most of them still don't have a searchability, at least not an easy searchability. So I hope Twitter, X, whatever, we all have our different visions of how that could play out. One would be that Elon gets tired of it and it goes bankrupt and gets reborn. Because the project as you've described, I don't think it would be really easy to replicate that process.
No, definitely not. I think there's a different level of vulnerability that we have seen on Twitter and Instagram, and maybe some other sites that I'm not sure has come across yet to sites like Blue Sky, where people are, I think it's a little bit more professional still, and I think you can be vulnerable and professional, but people are maybe not sharing personal stories as much, at least that I've seen.
What you're describing is sort of LinkedIn-ish.
Yeah, that's sort of how it feels to me right
That's
now on some
interesting.
networks. Yeah.
Yeah, and each one of these platforms has its own sort of dynamic and personality too. So I mentioned the community that's been built with these 30 essays. Is there an engagement process across them? Is there a way to sustain this forward in terms of, relating to how NSF and other federal agencies work to do better, to make science more effective? Or can we do that? I'm happy to help make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in and say one of the things that we did is we have a bunch of discussion questions at the end of the book, and we have them for different sections because, as you probably noticed, it's divided up into a couple of sections following our nautical theme of the book, which we thought made it a lot more fun and relatable in some ways. So I think that helps in terms of getting people possibly doing book clubs or working with students with it. I work at NOAA. I work at NOAA Fisheries, and I gave a talk for the NOAA Library. And actually, NOAA Library is doing one book, one community event.
One book, one NOAA, I think.
Yeah, sorry. I think other groups or agencies have done this too, but they're using Uncharted as their inaugural book for this program. I think the email announcement will come out soon. But the fact that at least at NOAA, there's a lot of excitement and engagement around this book, and trying to use this book to help talk more about disabilities in science is really encouraging. So I can speak to my workplace in terms of the impact it's had, which is really exciting. Others, I would hope that people get excited about reading it. I think the reason why we did stories is because there's a lot of psychological evidence that personal stories can sometimes be the best way to help people understand concepts and important things more so than just facts and persuasive essays, I guess, or more like science writing. So that's why we did it the way that we did it. So,
is there a Story Collider? Can this be revisited in Story Collider in some way, or?
Yeah, we did an episode.
Sorry,
we did an episode in August. We're hoping there will be another one with a couple contributors, but we've been connecting with them about getting some of them on the podcast.
we're really hoping this can be like a jumping off point for these contributors to continue sharing their stories or their research or really whatever is important to them. Because a lot of times as disabled community members, we don't have a lot of extra time, maybe
Yeah, right.
none. And so having this be something that's in their portfolio and in their back pocket for when they're applying for jobs or pitching other things, I really hope that it's helping for their CVs and for whatever people want to do next.
That certainly makes sense. Although that gets back to something you mentioned earlier, which is in relation to social media platforms where imperfections or personal issues are sort of downgraded in terms of I think that translates into academia too, where you're not really rewarded for being a person. You're rewarded for your publications.
Right.
It's, I've done almost 3 years ago, I did an early session on just the challenges early career scientists face in pursuing sustainability focused inquiry, because just as you said, for disability, that comes with a requirement to just to learn the language of another discipline, to talk to across disciplines. To do place-based, community-based research requires another dimension, and all of that requires time. This was this discussion we had including with Rita Caldwell, who used to run NSF. And if you add the layer of disability on top of that, it feels hard.
Yeah.
How much of this is about giving yourself the space the emotional space to feel that, to just for people to grapple with that reality?
That's a tough one. I want to just say yes, but I think it's complicated, and I'm thinking a lot of our anonymous contributors who don't have the professional space or safety or security to necessarily share their stories with a name attached.
I completely forgot. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us about that whole, how many there are and why, what the particular aspects of those contributions were.
Yeah, we have 2 who are anonymous and then 1 who has a pseudonym. So I think it's 3 total. And they, I could give adjectives and it would very quickly narrow down who they are, but we took confidentiality so seriously that their publishing agreements, I think, actually just stayed with us, and we have pseudonyms or anonymous on the contracts that ended up going to Columbia. And that's how strongly people, fear, rightly so, ableism and discrimination, especially around mental health. We saw a lot of people who were interested in sharing about mental health or mental illness and were concerned that it was going to really impact how they were perceived short-term and long-term. So that was a big challenge for us.
And there was this thing called, pregnancy.
Yeah.
Having kids.
Right.
Came up in the conversations too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a passage about that. And I think that reflects some of the same dynamics we were talking about earlier. Unspoken kind of ableism.
Yeah, I think I was slightly surprised that we only ended up with one story that dealt with pregnancy from an anonymous author, right? Even though I think most of our contributors identify as female, I think the majority do. And that tells you something right away, because we don't call pregnancy a disability, but yet we judge people so harshly for it or put them in another box or category because of their medical condition, right? And then if you tie mental health into it, right, there's a whole history of women being institutionalized for hysteria and all that stuff that's associated with just being female, having a female body. And so, you know, there's a lot there. I still really think it's amazing our anonymous contributors still contributed. They felt strongly enough about sharing their story, maybe not safe enough to put their name to it, but they still wanted to get the story out there. So,
yeah, here's one. By the way, I appreciate those content warnings. To a certain extent, they're kind of whimsical. I don't want to say it got me smiling, but at the same time, it's serious too. Because some of them were, like caution, vomit. But that feels, there's a level of awareness in the book that I think is really, really cool. Was it hard? Did this really emerge, gestate completely at Columbia University Press, or were there other publishers interested, or is it just?
We worked from CUP from the very beginning. So our editor there, Miranda, was really helpful in giving us feedback and helping through the peer review process. 'Cause I don't think that we realized, at least at the very beginning, that it was going to be peer reviewed. So it has, all the aspects of like peer review struggles or benefits from like a scientific publication, but in a book length work. So that was something I don't think that we were fully expecting. But there's, I think, one or two pieces that were previously published elsewhere. But as far as publishers, we worked just with Columbia. So it was pretty simple in that way, at least.
Yeah, I think we felt lucky that we had a publisher interested at the time.
Yeah.
Sure. No, the Columbia Press has been interesting. They've been very adventurous. They do a really wide range of books. I'm going to be starting to scope out some book plans now that I'm not working full time. There's something about filling that space, right? I have to be working overtime or not feeling. Let's write a book now instead of everything else I'm doing.
Take a break. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to back off from this book particularly and talk to both of you about science communication a little bit before we end. And I'm hoping that, this is a sort of a quiet time of day. So even if people aren't watching right now, this will be shared afterwards and we can sustain the conversation around it, including on Substack. I'm glad to see the book, and Gabby, you're on Substack. But Gabby, you have migrated to a career where science writing is the thing you do. So can you talk about that a little bit? Do you feel, by the way, did you feel wistful about not staying in that thing called science, or then what's going on in this new arena?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, especially with this book, and especially thinking about, talking all this stuff about scientists with disabilities and questioning whether I am even still a scientist at this point if I'm working in communication. And something I love about my job and about science communication is that I do feel like I'm still really closely connected to science. And so there are aspects that I miss for sure. Like I miss doing field work. I miss that like feeling of eureka or whatever you want to describe it when you find something out that no one else has known before. There's aspects like that I think I could have a very long list of things that I miss from not being in research per se. But at the same time, it's been a really, really cool way to be close to science and do it all from home. I work fully remotely. My company actually has a lot of people with different health conditions, and it's very purposefully like a highly accommodating company and workplace. So that's been something very cool that I did not foresee when I graduated. And was I graduated in August 2020, so it was a very strange time to be finishing a PhD and figuring out my next steps. So
wow, that's
I feel lucky. Yeah, it was quite the journey.
Our younger son graduated as an undergraduate into the pandemic, January 2020. And in film and TV industries that completely shut down.
Yeah.
He's emerging slowly. And Skylar, same thing with you. You devote a significant amount of your time to communication. What's the balance? Does the balance feel good for you right now? How does that?
Yeah, that's a good question because I'm a federal employee now.
Right.
So, and I work in a regional office. So we of NOAA Fisheries in Alaska, and so we have more of like a management policy communication focus. I think a little bit more anyway than some of the science centers. So I'm still doing some science writing and proposal development, and sometimes I go in the field. I got to go to the Aleutian Islands last month actually,
Wow.
but a lot of focus is on the communication and having that be sort of a core part of a lot of the work that I do, whether it's communicating with like the Fisheries Council or NOAA more broadly or other project partners or groups that we're working with, or the Science Center. And then I feel like a lot of the science communication work I've done otherwise has been promoting this book. This last year, it's been a huge part of our time. And I've had a couple of people ask me what's next, and I'm like, I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure. I really do like writing though, and obviously I like oral storytelling. So, but yeah, I'm not quite sure yet.
Well, up in Alaska, there's certainly, one thing I evolved toward from storytelling myself is facilitating story sharing by others. I spent some time in the early 90s on a Native Canadian reservation in British Columbia, and there's so much story out there, and certainly in Alaska too, and not only the indigenous communities, but just people, fishermen, fisherwomen here, and as you all know, in Maine, I'm surrounded by stories that are around marine resources that are just aching to sort of come out, and I'm just blue skying here, but maybe there's some prospect of sort of a science collider for the marine resource community. Maybe that would be interesting.
Absolutely. And I'm still a producer for the Story Collider sometimes, remotely for coaching here and there. And actually, I got involved in our local storytelling group here in Juneau called Mud Rooms. So I help
mud rooms.
Mud Rooms, yeah, and it's called Mud Rooms because it's like you come in from the day and take off your boots in the mud room and start talking about your day, right? Like, oh, I saw a bear. Actually, I did see bears this morning.
Wow.
On our morning walk, a mom and 2 cubs. They're really fat now at the end of the season.
That's cool.
But people have, all sorts of wild tales to share, and they actually get played on our local NPR station here as well. So I'm now a board member, and I helped run a free workshop this last weekend and do a little bit of coaching, and that's a lot of fun because I like getting involved in the community.
Oh, it looks like it's been going on for quite a while too. I see 2000, even 10 years ago. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the more our muddy roots, I think Maine needs
a really cool organization.
Maine needs mudroom too. I should work on that. I'll start one in Ellsworth.
If you can convince everyone to go. I did some storytelling in Maine, but I feel like people in Maine are often at one of their 3 jobs that they have. But they have so many great stories to tell. It's just sometimes you have to find a way to get them to get all together. But we miss Maine because we lived there a long time.
I'm just learning. I grew up in Rhode Island in New England. So for me, coming here from the Hudson Valley after half my life in the Hudson River is an arm of the sea. Technically, it's a fjord, but it wasn't like what I grew up in Rhode Island. And so being in Maine here now is my mother-in-law is 91. She's from Winter Harbor, a tiny little lobster village. And it's just so much fun getting out on the water. Saw a seal a little while ago. And
that's awesome.
The seal, he or she, kind of surprised me. I was in my kayak just quietly sitting there in totally calm conditions, and suddenly I heard this big splashy kind of disturbance 10 feet away, and it was already gone. But it's wonderful. And finding ways to integrate that face-to-face storytelling with what we're doing here can add another layer of connectedness. And I think often about, we're drifting a little bit from the theme of the book, but I think in a way not. Way back in my .Earth days at the New York Times, I met up face to face with some young British educators who were building a sort of sea level rise learning experience for students all around the Atlantic Ocean. They were in they'd gone to Nigeria, Scotland. They were in Nantucket, and I met them. And this is well over a decade ago. You know, Skype was really the main thing connecting people. And they did these projects on the beach with kids learning, you know, here's what a meter of sea level rise looks like. And the kids were out there with with their surveying tools and stuff. And then they connected them. So the students in Nigeria were talking to the ones in Scotland. And I thought that, whether it's a disability challenge or whether it's coastal community kids or whether it's any one of the things we all think about, finding ways to have the physical experience, the common, and then the sharing experience. I think we're still in the early days of figuring out how much benefit can come from that.
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the essays that came to mind for the theme of your show, Sustain What, is Glenn Everett's story in there. I don't know if you got to read it. I think it's called The Social Model of Disability. But his whole story is about realizing that people can be cut off from knowing about something or communicating about something, not just because of disability, but also because of their language barrier or their economics. And that, relates to his field working in, I think, urban sustainability. And so his essay really explores that. And it's a great little story that actually takes place in Portland, Oregon. And he's from England, but it's kind of a nice story that relates to, I think, exactly what you're talking about, Andy.
Yeah. Well, I didn't read that one, and now I've got some work to do. And I'm hoping everyone who's watching and who watches this later can dive into the book and explore these stories at the intersection of disability and science and community. There's a lot here worth exploring, worth sharing with others, and seeing where you can act to make things a little better. So it's just great to be able to connect with you both today about the book and about this challenge and opportunity. And maybe we can revisit, if we can get a couple of the authors on here, the other contributors, that'd be really fun. And we could look at one of the sub themes, the academia advancement theme.
Yep.
Or community engagement around the issue. That'd be great. So thanks. This is is there anything more you'd like to say about the book and or where you go from here? That'd be great. Maybe Gabby and then Skylar.
I think I just want to say thank you.
A good question has just come in too. So hold your catchy thought.
Yeah.
So Susanna Spire says, anything about COVID era and disability, long COVID.
Yeah.
The filmmaker Josh Fox has a film coming out about his own experience with long COVID and his environmental activism at the same time. But so what about COVID, and has that helped or hurt or?
I mean, I think we both consider COVID to be like a mass disabling event.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm not sure we've fully dealt with, at least in the US. I don't know if there's enough support for people with long COVID to sort of say, you're joining a community of people who are disabled and who can live great lives. And this also might suck. And it also can be really hard, and sort of just wrap people up in that support, especially if they haven't been able to have the energy or the ability to go out and meet people. Like we were just saying, right? Like that human connection, I think, is missing so far. So we're seeing a higher incidence of disability while also having less connection, I think.
And you know what? There's another aspect of it too. It's a contested thing. There are people out there who scoff at the idea of long COVID, et cetera. So, and several other of the disability and or chronic illness conditions described in the book are also contested, and that adds this layer of toughness, I think, too.
Yeah, and one thing I will point out is that a lot of the stories, a lot of the stories were written during COVID, and some of them actually talk about the context of, being in the COVID era. I feel like there's at least a handful of them, but some of the things that happened during like the pandemic itself is that it was more accessible in some ways with people with disabilities, because if they had to stay home and remotely connect, that was okay because everyone was doing it. And I actually think now in some ways is a lot more challenging because people want everything to go back to normal, which there's still COVID everywhere. Yeah. So, you can see some of the context in some of the stories. But having that access is a huge part of disability, and in some ways there was more access.
That's a really good point. It normalized that option. My older son works in the film business too, like my younger one, and he's all online. He won't go back. It's and they're letting him. It's not so much a disability issue for him as a cultural, societal. He doesn't. It's different, but that having that option is important. And Susanna Spire says she'll check out the Josh Fox movie. I'm going to do a conversation with him here.
Oh, cool.
It's not quite done yet, his film. She says she's interested in reading more about the deep sociological history of disability and how earlier cultures have dealt with it. Any recommendations? I don't know if in your...
I've got two.
Oh, here we go.
I don't know if they're reversed or not, but we have a disability history. No, they're not reversed.
And let me just make you bigger here, so it'll be on the screen.
It helps when I'm sitting right next to my bookshelf.
Oh, wrong. But... Here we go. Hold on. Sorry. I'll get it right. 1 second. After 3 or 4 years of this, you'd think I'd be better at it.
It's effortless. I'm very impressed.
No, you can see I'm messing things up now. I'll go back here, and then here, and then, hold on, I'm almost there. Here.
Awesome. Okay, so we got The Disability History of the United States by Kim Nielsen. And that was blurbed by Alice Wong, who we're both big fans of. And then Alice Wong has the book Disability Visibility, which is not so much the long term, but it's a wide range of stories from people across industries and experiences and disabilities. So those are both good ones. I would probably start with this one. Yeah.
Great.
I was also going to recommend Black Disability Politics by Sammy Schalk, which is really interesting. I don't know that any of these get to like the earlier culture question, but they are important history and pieces. So
yeah.
Black disability. What was the last word?
Politics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's great. And Susanna also says she has a newsletter. She wants to contact you to discuss the book and the overlap of COVID era. Oh, it's immunocompromisedtimes.substack.com. Susanna, I'll make sure to follow up with you and connect you with both Skylar and Gabby. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm also on Substack and really enjoying settling in there too. It's a good, diverse community, still evolving. So back to that last question, I was going to ask any last sort of where do we go from here idea here related to the book, the community, and your own thinking. If you have anything, Gabby or Skylar, that'd be great.
I'll just say thank you. It's an honor to be able to share this with you and your audience, and I really hope that people feel like they can engage with disability, and it doesn't have to be something to be scared of.
I think, and Skylar, anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of people I think have asked why we don't have like a how to fix everything kind of section of this book, or they're like, how do we fix everything? And we're like, well, the first step is really listening to people. So we really hope that this helps open people's mind to what other experiences are like in disability.
The more listening, the better. Yeah. And that's, people forget that part of the process of communication. As Pete Seeger, my old friend, used to, when he was singing a song, he'd always halfway through the song hold his hand to his ear, basically saying, "I can't hear you." And it comes up all the time, active, real listening. Journalists profess to be listening all the time, but they're not. They're mostly, speaking as a practitioner, they're mostly listening for things they already think they need to hear to build a story. And so that process is really important if you want to make progress on tough issues like this one. And Susanna says, last thank you from her too. She's got the books queued up on her Audible. Although she says your book is not on Audible, but
yes,
let's work on all that.
We're working on that. We're asking a lot. Unfortunately, it's not up to us, but we've been pressing our publisher about getting an audio version so that it's more accessible.
Absolutely, to people who don't have the vision gift. That makes so much sense. Well, thank you again, both of you, for being here today. Thanks for tuning in, Susanna, and who else will see this? Whoever else will see this in the weeks ahead. Andy Revkin here. And this is the Sustain What webcast that I do, trying to navigate where complexity and consequence collide. And this is an issue that is a tough one, but it's one that we can all make progress on. So wherever you are when you see this, share it with someone else, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks, Gabby, and thanks, Skylar, for being here today.
Thank you,
Andy.
And